Hi everybody, it's Andy and welcome again to my office in Modesto, California. I'm an attorney licensed to practice law in California as well as New York. This video is going to go over California spousal support in divorce cases. So, as you can probably imagine, perhaps if you're going through a divorce, a very common question from the perspective of the spouse who might have to pay spousal support is, how much do I have to pay? Why do I have to pay that versus something else? How long do I have to pay it for? Similarly, from the perspective of the other spouse, how much am I going to get? Why do I get that versus something else? Why do I get spousal support for this amount of time versus another amount of time? So all of those questions, regardless of which perspective you're asking it from, is something that I think all of us can agree is very reasonable to kind of wonder. So hopefully this video is going to help you if you're in a situation like that, regardless of which perspective you're asking the question from. So the short answer to that question is, unfortunately, it depends. California has two kinds of spousal support. Number one is called temporary or pendente lite support. Pendente lite is, I think, a Latin term. Don't really say it all that often. Most everyone just calls it temporary spousal support. The other kind, as you can probably guess, because the names are not terribly creative, is called permanent support. So permanent support, when people typically talk about alimony, like having to pay alimony to my ex, that's something that usually is going to be permanent support, although technically it could be temporary support as well. What makes the spousal support question a little bit confusing, I think, is that people, when they talk about it, when lawyers talk about it, when judges talk about it, they don't explicitly say temporary spousal support, permanent spousal support. A lot of times they'll just call it spousal support, and you kind of wonder, from a layperson's perspective, which one are they talking about? So I'm going to go ahead and go over both of them. So hopefully after watching this video you can get an idea, like a more complete picture of what support you have to pay or what support you're going to receive. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So the first kind of support in California is called temporary or pendente lite support. The basic idea behind this is that this is support that is paid from one spouse, the higher earning spouse, to the other spouse during the term of the divorce case. So the term could be, from when the case is filed, at some date in the past, all the way until when the judgment is finally signed by the judge, a year, several months, whatever, into the future. So this could be, like I said, several years, it could be several months. There's no way to really predict that. So this is the maximum amount, or the maximum duration rather, of temporary spousal support when the case is filed to when the judgment is signed. For various reasons, in some cases, it's worthwhile to ask for temporary support right away. So, for example, it's going to be paid for longer. In some cases, I've had some cases, for example, where strategically it was better to wait several months to file for temporary spousal support. So the thing is, the duration is going to be much shorter. But in terms of duration, though, temporary spousal support can be ordered to be paid during the pendency of the divorce case. It will end when the judgment is signed off. Any support that might have to be paid after that, that's going to be called permanent support, and that's going to be the next section of this video. So that's duration for temporary spousal support. As far as amount goes, temporary spousal support is going to be computed via a software program. DissoMaster is the most kind of well-known one, I guess, amongst lawyers. There's another version, or another kind of company, I guess, that produces a software program called Spouse, the letter X and the word spouse. And that can be used as well. But the basic idea, regardless of which software program you use, is that you take the gross monthly income of each spouse, the high earning one and the low earning one, you dump it into the computer program and you click the button, the computer program spits out a figure. $1,000, $2,000, whatever. And so the basic idea then behind whatever amount is ordered is that temporary spousal support is meant to maintain the status quo of the household as best you can, or as best as possible, I guess, during the pendency of the divorce. And the reason why that's necessary is a situation like this. I had never encountered it before starting to do divorces, but after having done, I would guess maybe 65, 100 divorces, I've lost count. But after doing a bunch of divorces, this is actually remarkably common. So the situation that I find a lot is like this. Let's say that in a relationship, a husband and wife, husband is the one who works outside the home and earns all the money. The wife, hasn't worked in, say, 10 or so years, and during that time she stayed at home, raised the kids, run the household, and so on. So let's say that one day the husband, not to pick on husbands here, I've seen it reversed as well, where the wife is the one who earns, the dad stays home. But let's say in my example that the husband one day decides, that, hey, I don't want to be married to you anymore. I've met my girlfriend. I'm going to move in with her. I'm going to run off with my secretary, whatever. And the dad or the husband decides that, hey, I'm not going to support you guys from now on. You, wife, are on your own. Kids, so long kids, I'm not going to support you guys anymore. So in a situation like that, the wife is basically up a creek, so to speak. She hasn't worked in 10 years, her skills might be out of date. Maybe she never went to school at all, so the thing is she has to go do that, or maybe she went to school so long ago that whatever she studied is no longer relevant. So the process, she'll eventually have to go back to work, but the thing is, the process by which she does that is not going to be something immediate. So an immediate concern, I guess, would be like she still has to pay rent. She still has to buy food, pay the mortgage, etc. Husband, basically, by being selfish and kind of running off with, the secretary, the girlfriend, has basically left his family up a creek. So temporary support is something that is meant to kind of address that situation. It can be ordered by the court, like I've described, and a lot of times it can be taken right out of husband's paycheck. So, he can say that he doesn't want to pay it, but he really doesn't have a choice in a lot of situations. Excuse me. So that's the basic idea behind temporary support. It's meant to maintain the status quo of the household as best as possible during the pendency of a divorce. Again, maximum amount of time from the time the case starts to the time the judgment is signed off on. So it's also like the amount is computed by software program, and it's based almost exclusively on the gross monthly income of each spouse. So that's the basic idea behind temporary support. This same kind of idea behind getting emergency money, so to speak, I guess, to kind of buy food, pay rent, all that stuff. That can be applied to children as well. In other words, you can ask for temporary child support as well. I don't have a video on that as of today, but the basic idea that I've just described will apply as well. Disamaster or ex-spouse software is basically used. The gross monthly income of each party is dumped into the program, and the program will say, this much has to be paid for temp spousal, this much has to be paid for temporary child support. So that's the basic idea behind temporary support, spousal or child. And let's go ahead and talk about permanent support right now. So on the surface, it might seem a little academic to distinguish between temporary spousal support and permanent spousal support, because at the end of the day, both forms of support are just money that needs to get paid or received. So the reason, however, you do distinguish them is because the purposes of each form of support are actually quite different, which basically means that the eligibility criteria are different, the computation amount, or the computation process rather, is different, the amount is different. A whole bunch of things are different from one kind of support to the other. So I'll give you a common example. If you are in a divorce case and you have asked for and received temporary spousal support, that does not guarantee that you will get permanent support. It is actually very common for a person to receive one kind of support but not the other, because again the eligibility criteria are different. In terms of duration, I mentioned in the last section of the video that temporary spousal support is paid, the maximum time is during the term of the case, from the date the case is filed all the way until the date the judgment is signed. Anything that is paid after this date, that's going to be the permanent support. The duration of that permanent support will vary depending on the length of the marriage. So if you're watching this video, perhaps you've heard of the kind of often cited rule, I guess, that permanent spousal support is paid for half the length of the marriage. Like half the length of the marriage is something that's repeated a lot. People a lot of times will think that half the length of the marriage applies all the time. I can tell you right now that it doesn't. It depends on whether or not the marriage in question was more or less than 10 years long. If it was less than 10 years, so 9 years, 364 days, that marriage is considered short term. That is when half the length of the marriage is kind of the rule of thumb, I guess, for permanent spousal support. If your marriage was 10 or more years long, your marriage is long term. In that case, the half the length of the marriage rule does not apply. It can, but it, as a general rule, does not. Judges in long-term marriage cases have a lot more discretion about how long to order permanent spousal support for versus a short-term marriage. So I'll tell you right now, I personally have seen cases in which parties were married 20 years, and now they're entering the 21st year after the divorce, and one party is still paying permanent alimony to the other. I've also seen cases where people were married, say, 25 years, and permanent alimony stopped after 10 or stopped after 12. That can happen as well. It's very open-ended, which unfortunately, if that's your situation, doesn't really help you, but that's just the way the rules are written. So in terms of duration, like that's duration, computation amount, I kind of explained in the last section of the video that temporary spousal support, the computation is almost mechanical in nature. You take the gross monthly income, you dump it into the computer spits out a figure. In terms of permanent spousal support, however, in my experience, which is by no means exhaustive, but in my experience, parties will, if nothing else, go to trial over permanent spousal support. The amount, like $200 a month versus $900 a month, etc. So the basic idea, the purpose behind permanent spousal support is to kind of transition one, like the lower earning spouse, I guess, from the lifestyle of the marriage down to something kind of gradual, like down to something more sustainable, to self-sufficiency, I guess. To make that transition as gradual as possible. So the marital standard of living, you might have heard that term, is going to be very important in establishing what permanent spousal support amount to set. Parties will naturally, as you can imagine, disagree about what the marital standard of living was. And in my experience, if nothing else, parties will go to trial over what permanent spousal support should be paid. So in terms of purpose, like I said, it's something that is meant to transition the spouse, like the lower earning spouse, from the marital standard down to something where they're self-sufficient. It's also meant to kind of compensate the lower earning spouse, I guess, to kind of aid in that transition for any damage that they might have done to their own kind of career or earning ability. So I'll give you the kind of typical example. Let's say that husband and wife get married and wife was working on her own, like she had her career before, but after getting married they had kids, she gave up her job, she stayed home. And now 15 years has passed, and now all of a sudden she wants to go, like she has to go back to work because husband's left and moved in with his secretary. Wife can't just go back to work like overnight, like maybe she never went to school originally, or maybe when she went to school, all the things that she learned, all her experience is outdated. She has to go retrain. All of that will take time. The purpose of permanent spousal support is to kind of aid in that transition, I guess. So to get the spouse, the wife, in my example, back on her feet. So as you can, I guess, hopefully tell from that description, permanent spousal support, very different from temporary. The duration is different. You might get one type of you might get one type of support, but not the other. The computation is different, the amount is different, the purpose is different. A whole bunch of things are different. So what I think is more confusing than not, one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video, is that when people talk about alimony or spousal support, they don't really distinguish between temporary and permanent. So I think a lot of people actually think there's only one kind, and it turns out there's not, there's two. So that's hopefully something that, after seeing this video, is a lot less confusing for you. So hopefully that made sense. If you want to rewind this video to watch it from the very beginning, you're certainly free to. Leave me a comment if you want, click subscribe if you want, I would really appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and paste California Family Code section 4320 down below in the description box. So just in case you need to kind of refer to it, you can. So again, hopefully that helped. Try not to make it too confusing, but good luck, and I will talk to you guys next time. Thanks.